it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dennis Chookaszian.
Thank you very much, Julio, and it's a pleasure to be here. My degree from Northwestern was in 1965, 50 years ago, and things have changed a bit since that time. And I'd like to just try to put a little bit of that in perspective. When I was here, the primary thing that I had to do was learn the Clausius-Clapeyron equation and understand the principles of chemical engineering. And the society was a relatively stable society at that point, not that much change, although at the time people thought there was a lot of unrest, but in fact, relative to today, it's quite different. And so things have evolved dramatically, and I'd like to focus this morning in our brief time here on what are the changes that have occurred. And I think the two dominant changes that are really very different today from 50 years ago when I was here are, one is communication. With the advent of social media, all the various forms of communication, we communicate much more rapidly, information changes, and it changes all societal processes. Elections are now driven by communications in ways that never happened before. That's one factor. The other factor that's less talked about, but I think a very important one, is the changing nature of ethics in the society. And I'd like to take and just give you one little example of that, of the impact that ethics has on what we make as decisions. And that, the changing nature can be looked at when we look at autonomous vehicles. When you look at autonomous vehicles, the self-driving cars, and I'm sure you've followed a lot of what's going on there in some of the debate, but it's interesting how it's changed the nature of the actions that you have to take with regard to those vehicles and what happens with regard to the the decisions that will be made by a computer that were made by you as an individual. I'm going to start with a story that goes back quite a while ago, about 30 years ago, and it talks about the setting of governance principles within corporations. Ford Motor made a car called the Pinto. The Pinto had a defect, which was when hit from behind, the gas tank was so close to the rear bumper that it exploded and caught fire, and obviously causing huge damage to the passengers. Death was a very serious consequence, obviously, of what happened when you had those explosions from the gas tanks. So it happened, and when that event occurred, there were a number of crashes like that. Lawsuits were brought. In the trial, what came out was that the Ford engineers had actually seen the videos of the car being hit from behind and exploding, and they were going, holy cow, look at this, what do we do now? And they looked at it and they did an evaluation of what it would take to correct the difference. And the difference was a pretty small difference, and this is all online, by the way, you can read about this if you're interested. It was about $14 or $15 per vehicle, but across all the vehicles, $130 million. And so they looked at it and they did a calculation of how many people would die every year. And it turned out to be that it was around 8 people a year they estimated would die a year by this. They calculated the cost of a settlement at $1 to $2 million per death, so they contrasted 130 million versus 10 or 15 million and said, we're not going to make the change. They didn't make the change. The jury saw this, was incensed, and they awarded $130 million to this one individual. And so that set a standard that fundamentally communicated through the courts to all corporations that there is no value you can place on human life. You have to do your utmost to protect it regardless of the cost. So fast forward to today with automation, and so what does that have to do with today's vehicles? Well, that principle still exists. In automobile manufacturers, they do everything they can to make that the safest possible vehicle regardless of cost. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You're driving on a road, 2-lane road, semi coming at you this way, you're going in the other direction, going 65 miles an hour. The semi pulls into your lane. Oh, okay. Thank you. The semi-truck pulls into your lane, and you realize that when you're driving that you have two choices. There's another semi behind, you can't go left, so the only choice is to slam into the truck or go right. If you go right, what you're going to do is jump up on the sidewalk, and there's a pedestrian, a woman pushing a baby carriage with a baby in it. So you realize those are your two choices. What are you going to do? The instantaneous reaction that almost everyone has is self-preservation. You jump up on the road and you hit the pedestrian. I teach a course in corporate governance, and when I ask students, what do you think you would do, 95% of the people say, I realize that my reaction is going to probably be to make that ethical decision to jump up on the road and hit that pedestrian. So now you're in the same situation, but you're now in an autonomous vehicle. The car's driving down the road in the same way. It comes to that same circumstance, and now you're in the back seat, and so what does the car do? Does it slam into the truck, or does it jump off, break the traffic laws, and hit the pedestrian? Remember the Ford Motor case, can't jump off the road. If it jumps off the road, that's the exact principle that that was established with the Ford case, that you can't jump off the road and kill the pedestrian, breaking traffic laws. So you have to slam into the semi. Would you buy that car? You're not going to buy a car that's going to kill you, because that's going to make a decision you wouldn't make. So what are the choices? And I'll give you 3 options. First option is the manufacturer, when they're making that decision, of course, has to decide whether to jump off the road or not. They almost can't make that decision. So a second option would be that when you get into the car, 2 buttons pop up. The one button says, protect the pedestrian. The other says, protect the passengers. You push a button. You make the choice in advance, and you've now solved the ethical dilemma, and you've made your ethical choice. I'm your auto insurer. I'm not going to insure you if you pick slam into the truck, because that's going to be a much more expensive case. So if you can't do either of those 2, what's the choice? The manufacturer can't do it. You can't make the choice, so how does that choice get made? Can't be random, so there has to be a way to do it. So I'll give you an engineering idea that one of you may want to take and develop into a Nobel Prize winning solution. So when this occurs, each of the individuals within the society, man, woman, and child, is going to be required to have a small microprocessor implanted in their chest. The microprocessor is going to calculate your cumulative remaining lifetime value. Now, if we sat some social scientists down, we could come to a conclusion as to what that might be. Do you play the violin? Do you have a criminal record? How many years do you have to live? How many dependents do you have? So we calculate that. You get into the car. It's running the algorithm. The car scans your chip. The car scans your chip, and it scans the chip of your passengers. So it knows the value of the people in the car, sees the woman on the side when this emergency situation happens, scans her chips, and so it's the one with the lowest cumulative remaining lifetime value. So that's a great societal solution, and I expect to get a commission from whoever develops this into a Nobel Prize winning idea. So obviously this it's facetious, a little tongue-in-cheek, because nobody is going to allow a microprocessor to be planted in your chest. But this is the dilemma that you all face. The dilemma is that you now have these changing social mores where you have many decisions that were ethical decisions made by each of us in the society into your day-to-day activities. So it's an interesting thing for you to think about. So communications and the changing nature of ethics are the 2 things that I think are the most dramatic changes that are going to take place in the society. So I'd like to finish just with a quick note on views of my own career and what I saw in my career and what I saw in other people's careers and the impact on success. And as a result of that, I've come to the conclusion that there are really 3 keys to success. Those keys to success are technical competency, attitude, and networking. So as you move out into society, you're going to be working for a large corporation, doing something entrepreneurial. There's a lot of different things you could do. So what I've seen in every successful person is the following 3 characteristics. First is technical competency. You have to find something that you do better than anyone else around you. It can't be something that you're just sort of, okay, I'm as good as everyone else. You have to find a way to stand out. So if there isn't something that you're dramatically better at than everyone else around you, you will never be seen, and you will end up not getting to what potentially your ultimate ambitions are. So you have to find that element of technical competency. There's an old poker adage that says if you sit down around a table to play poker, if you don't know who the pigeon is, it's you. So what you have to consider is this self-identification of knowing what you're good at. The second is attitude. With attitude, if you're not the person that everybody wants to be with, a friendly person, the person's always on time, all of those aspects of it, you're ending up putting yourself in a position where you're not going to be recognized as a person who is going to be the successful person in the organization. And finally, the last element of is networking. No matter what you do, you need to continue to expand your network and be in contact with as many people as you can, because it opens up opportunities and allows you to get people to understand what you can do. Julio mentioned connectivity, and I know in my own career, and I know that people I know who are successful, they spend a lot of time going to meetings, meeting people, communicating, and particularly with today's level of communication capability, it's an easier thing to do. So this is an exciting time for all of you, and I congratulate you on your degrees and wish you the best success in the future. Thank you.